The IMF declares the global economy is entering a new dangerous phase, just as Greece tries to grab at another £8 billion handout to stumble on with. The global economic outlook today, grim.
In Greece, they're getting ready to implement yet another economic shock. But with world growth draining away, can anything save this country from default?
They're already burning their tax bills in Athens. If the fate of Greece is sealed, cannot the same be said for the euro and indeed our own economic prospects? The economic journalist Martin Wolf is here, along with a former Chancellor of the Exchequer and a City analyst. And is Liberal Democrat enthusiasm the only thing standing between the British government and a fit of full-on Europhobia?
If you keep beating the anti-European drum, if you slaver over tax cuts for the rich, then you will put in peril the most crucial achievement of this government.
The Energy Secretary will be here to bury the misbegotten euro or possibly to praise it. Time was when governing took place on paper and in triplicate. So what happens when politicians make decisions on smartphones? Michael Cockerell pokes the anthill to see what crawls out.
And what does the story about the government minister and the hidden unofficial email system tell us about how the secret world of Whitehall works today?
The Greek government tonight said they're getting close to agreeing a deal for the latest instalment of desperately needed bailout money. No one suggests that will put an end to the Greek crisis, let alone the enormous corrosive uncertainty which pervades the whole euro project. And if you doubt how desperately serious may be the consequences of this problem for all of us, listen to the International Monetary Fund today. It slashed its growth forecast and said if political leaders fail to find a way of sorting the mess in the Eurozone, things could get much, much worse. Paul Mason is in Athens. So, Paul, is there a deal or what?
Jeremy, the meeting finished about 90 minutes ago, and there is no deal. They'll carry on negotiating in the weekend in Washington and here next week in Athens. There's no rush, of course, because Greece has about 25 days worth of cash before it has to switch the lights off here in the Acropolis and sack the people who look after that and every other state employee in the country. So no rush. We do, however, I think, know some of the details of the deal. We're seeing Greek national newspapers being briefed tonight. Kathimerini has 100,000 workers, state workers, to be sacked or moved on to involuntary holidays. 50% cuts in wages for some public sector workers, and just generally more austerity. Now, I've been meeting people today, school students who've turned up in their schools in September, no textbooks. I've been hearing the police trade union claiming that police officers having to buy their own Kevlar armour, fill up their own patrol cars. All this before the new round of austerity, because the old austerity didn't work. And what it means is things are going to get a lot tougher. While the politicians dithered, the people were once again out on the streets. Greek civil servants know they're hours away from a mass redundancy programme. Tens of thousands will be laid off, tens of thousands more put on compulsory holidays on 60% pay. Once again, Greece is at the centre of the storm because past solutions have not worked. Under the terms of its first bailout in May last year, Greece was supposed to reduce its budget deficit to 7.6%. The latest estimate is 8.5% and rising. Its debt is predicted to hit 189% of GDP next year. As a result, IMF negotiators are holding back €8 billion of bailout money and imposing strict new austerity measures. At the centre of the New Deal is a €2 billion property tax, and this is what many people in Greece think of that tax. The problem is, those who are bailing Greece out just don't believe reforms will be enacted. The IMF yesterday called for a one-off shock to the system.
The European partners, in effect, have told you as a country that they will stand by you for as long as it takes, provided that Greece continue to pursue sound policies. So this, in our view, really places the ball in your court. The ball is in the Greek court, and implementation is of the essence.
But Greeks have had 18 months of this. There is a weariness on these streets, and many economists and politicians believe the medicine of tax rises and austerity is simply killing the patient.
When you have built within the people, the real, the concrete people, the very conviction that they are trying to impose measures that they have just imagined out of thin air, the real situation will not conform. Civil servants won't implement the measures, real people won't pay their taxes, and the whole country, the whole economic system of the country is going to gently flounder.
The turmoil in Greece is pulling other countries towards the danger zone. Italy saw its credit rating downgraded by the agency S&P, and any Greek default could trigger a banking crisis in France and Belgium and Germany.
The global economy has entered a dangerous new phase. The recovery has weakened considerably, and downside risks have increased sharply. Strong policies are needed both to improve the outlook and to reduce the risks.
Globally, the problems are mounting. Fiscal crisis and recession feed off each other. The IMF today revised its forecast down for the Eurozone and the USA and the UK.
What has happened is that markets have become more skeptical about the ability of policymakers, of governments, to stabilize their public debt.
And tonight, on the brink of yet another round of austerity and protest, Athens is the capital of the unknown.
Paul, from what's known of the austerity package, is it likely to work?
Well, it depends what we mean by working. There is a risk that Greece will default this week. That's why we're having this meeting. If Greece defaults, that's bad news for the world's banking system. But I think it's likely there's going to be a deal, because it's effectively a game of chicken between the IMF and EU negotiators and the Greek government. So we're down to the detail. But the detail is important, because what the IMF needs and the EU is to be able to go back to countries that provide the money for the bailout and say, this is not just going to work for now, but it will put Greece back on a path that, if it isn't spectacularly brilliant, is not disastrous, and we won't be here again and again and again. And that is very much in the balance whether they can do that. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel on measures like cutting the tax ceiling from €8,000 to €4,000. So you start paying tax when you earn €4,000. It's stuff they can do now and deliver now. Now, the reason is, I mean, the politics is clear here. We've had 18 months of very tough austerity on Greece that hasn't worked, because as they've shrunk the deficit, or tried to, their economy is shrinking faster. The tax take, as you heard there, is collapsing, in part because people are just not making profits, not making money, but also there is evasion, there is revolt, there is refusal. Now, what the IMF is effectively asking the Greek government, PASOK of course, a Social Democratic Party, is to finally turn round to its own electoral base and say, do you know what, the era is over. Free education, free healthcare, what's left of it, all the things we stood for are gone. And they want it to be a kind of a political shock, so that, as the IMF guy put it yesterday, the shock is felt and then we build from there. I think they just don't feel there's been enough psychological adjustment here in Athens or in the rest of Greece to what austerity really means.
And just very briefly, Paul, the significance of this downgrading of the IMF growth forecast?
Well, I think the IMF growth forecast for the USA, for the Eurozone, for UK, it means that we're running out of steam on the recovery. And we are now in the territory of looking for policy action, not just here in Athens, but in Washington, London and Brussels. And I think we can begin to expect some. We can expect tomorrow the US Central Bank to signal the start of some more money printing, quantitative easing 3 we're calling it. I think we can expect the European Central Bank to start not only lending money short term to Italy and Spain, but borrowing on their behalf, issuing its own bonds. But the big policy debate that all politicians, not just ours in Britain and those in Greece, have to grapple with is, can there be more stimulus?
Okay.
If the old stimulus didn't work, what price the next stimulus.
Paul, thanks very much indeed. Well, with us now is the economic journalist Martin Wolf, the former Chancellor Lord Lamont, and the markets analyst Louise Cooper. Can Greece be saved from defaulting on its debts, do you think, Martin Wolf?
A very simple answer to that, no. There's absolutely no chance whatsoever that Greece will not default. The only question is when, how. Will it be cooperative or will it be on its own? And what will the consequences be? Almost no one. I think can now believe anything else.
You also believe that Greece will default?
I think it'll probably be put off until after 2013. I think they will find a package to get them through. I think
it is a default at the end.
It's been a partial default already, and I think there will be a further default. And I think it would have been better if this had been recognised earlier.
Right. What do you think?
I think it's absolutely given they cannot pay back the amount of debt they have. I wouldn't be quite so optimistic as 2013. What? Credit default swap market is telling you that it's getting close.
OK. So you all agree Greece is going to default at some point if it hasn't already done so. What is the consequence of that, Martin Wolf?
Well, it depends partly on how it's done. Is it in cooperation with an agreement that essentially they've reached the end of the road? In that case, it's possible to default without leaving the euro. What would happen would be there would be a huge write-down of debt, probably have to be halved at least, and there would then be an agreement to recapitalise the banks, only the Eurozone could do that, and to liquefy the banks. If that weren't done, Greece would effectively have to create a new currency.
OK. If it were done by agreement, wouldn't that destroy any credibility the euro had?
I think actually the opposite. My feeling is, from the very beginning, if the euro is going to work at all, and some of us have always been very sceptical, it includes the possibility, inherent in the model, that governments will default, just like states can default in the United States. The default is quite different from exit, though it can lead to exit. So default seemed to me always a plausible outcome, and Greece is the case.
What do you think, Lord Lamont?
I agree with that. But I think if Greece left the euro, which I think ought to happen probably in the long run, but if that happened now, I think that would be, well, one thing is it is possibly a problem, a disaster. The other would be a catastrophe. I think if that happened, you would see a huge increase in the debts of particularly French banks. All debts to Greece. And it would be a very difficult problem to manage. So you want Greece to stay
in the euro?
I think to have the exit forced by market pressure now would be absolutely catastrophic. I think it's in the interests of everyone that they should stay in for maybe a couple of years, and then you should have a reconsideration of the whole structure.
And how does it look in the markets?
It's looking ugly.
Sure.
I mean, the credit markets are getting to Lehman levels. They are creaking wildly. And the trouble is, because most commentators and journalists focus on equity markets, they don't really know about the wholesale funding markets. This is how banks fund themselves. And at BGC, it's what we do a lot of. And I spoke to the brokers today. I had a long chat with one of the brokers on one of these desks, and he said, if you're a French bank or any bank with any kind of exposure to Greece or Ireland or Portugal, getting short-term funding is difficult. He said you have to beg, borrow or steal. And banks have to, have to balance their books at the end of the day. It's all very well talking about big write-downs on Greece, but liquidity is far more important, and it's very tough out there.
What about the question not of falling out of the euro, but being chucked out of the euro?
Well, legally, it's impossible. There's nothing in the treaty that allows it. And you can't just leave the euro. Again, legally, you have to leave the European Union, and then you have to ask to come back. And I think in this case, they wouldn't be allowed back. So this was designed to be irrevocable, and that's how it's designed. So you'd have to create a new treaty. You know how that goes.
The Dutch Prime Minister and the Dutch Finance Minister have proposed that there should be, in addition to fiscal measures, that there should actually be a mechanism created for the future whereby countries that are not meeting their fiscal targets should be able to be expelled. But this is something that they've just put on the table, and it's for the longer term.
Need a new treaty.
But you're going to need new treaties, whatever happens. And one of the great problems, one of the reasons this thing is so dangerous, is that the stabilization mechanism, the European Financial Stability Facility, got it out just, has to be ratified by all the 17 members of the Eurozone. And some countries, for example, Slovakia, there is a 4-party coalition there. The 4th smallest party in the coalition is saying they won't vote for it. There are so many moving parts in this that even a small objection by a small country can tip the whole thing over the cliff. There's so many possibilities for miscalculation and error.
Now, at what point does this become really bad news for us?
Well, I think it's pretty bad news for us already. And the real danger, in my opinion, is that they go on with half measure after half measure, sticking plaster after sticking plaster. What happens is you get a respite for a few weeks, then you have another crisis, then another respite, then another crisis, and this goes on, and this is sapping confidence in the most appalling way.
Presumably it's already having, well, as Lord Lamont said, it's already having an effect, and presumably from where you are in the markets, the effect upon banks and the rest of it is something that begins to feed through to other parts of the economy, is it?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, as I said, the banks, there are many banks who are having trouble funding themselves on a day-to-day basis. I mean, they can get money, but it's expensive money, and they're funding very short-term, 1 day a week, 3 months, 6 months money or 12-month money that they used to be able to get all the time. That has gone. And banks' long-term funding, where they issue bonds, we haven't seen big European banks issue bonds since in June. So banks have big loan books. They have to fund them. And the banking system is getting close to crisis levels. And it's all very well talking about political will to sort the mess out, but this takes months, years.
No, I quite agree.
And the trouble is the markets don't wait that long. You know, when we talk about politicians being behind the curve, you are so far behind the curve, you need to run very quick to catch up.
The central bank has to create the money. There's no...
The European Central Bank.
The European Central Bank is now going to be forced to do everything it hates. Among other things, it's going to have to finance the governments in trouble, including countries like Italy and Spain. It's going to have to finance the banks. Its balance sheet is going to have to explode, and the Germans will absolutely loathe it. And in addition, as Christine Lagarde has pointed out, they're going to have to find some way of putting a lot of capital into their banks to make them look stronger.
And what does
the
it do to
European
us?
banking system, which is the biggest in the world, is now, I agree, completely under enormous stress.
And what happens to us?
Well, if they don't manage, they do manage this thing, it creaks on to some subsequent crisis. The breakup possibility is not small. The Germans will hate all this for obvious reasons, and they can leave, or at least they have more of an option than anybody else. But if they fix it, it goes on. If they don't fix it, we have a monstrous banking, sovereign crisis next door.
If people start leaving the euro, they have to leave the European Union.
Yes, well,
what's the end of the European Union then?
I think it's true. This is I've just written about this. If the Germans decide that they cannot stand this anymore, and they do decide to pull out, we're nowhere near that yet, but if they do, yes, the European Union, in my view,
well, this remakes the political map of Europe completely.
Indeed. This crisis is really very serious.
I think there's a tremendous tension in Germany. You have the political elite, the older generation, to whom this is the crowning jewel, the creation of the euro, in the process of integrating Germany, anchoring it in Europe. But public opinion, after the experience of reunification in Germany, is fed up with the cost of it, and opinion is changing, and Mrs. Merkel is sitting there waiting, hoping that some consensus will emerge, and it's not going to emerge.
OK, thank you all very much. Thank you. Now, the crisis in the euro casts a very long shadow indeed, which also falls across those of us who choose not to be part of the whole project, bailing out other European states who opted in